Let's turn our attention to issues of freedom of speech, because yesterday it was confirmed by the Culture Secretary, Baroness Morgan. She, of course, outgoing in that reshuffle today. She's going to be standing down from government. She said the broadcasting watchdog Ofcom would have their remit extended to enforce a new statutory duty of care to protect social media users from harmful content such as violence or child abuse. She announced new powers for Ofcom to regulate all content on the internet. Critics, though, have said the danger is that the plans could go too far and will end up with websites censoring what would be legitimate content. Now, there might be a very big difference between people who are actually promoting terrorism or sharing pictures of images of child sexual abuse and like. I think we could all agree we don't want those online. However, who gets to decide what is harmful but not necessarily illegal content? Well, let's discuss this with two guests now. Brendan O'Neill is editor of Spagged Online and campaigner for freedom of speech. And Marilyn Hawes is chief executive and founder of Freedom from Abuse, a charity teaching parents to protect their children from sexual abuse. Good morning to you both.
Morning.
Hi.
Good morning. Marilyn, let's come to you first. Why do you welcome these new powers for Ofcom?
Well, I think it's a joint two-prong attack, actually. They have to, because it's basically gone feral, really, with what's out there. But the internet, I think from a parental point of view and from a youngster's point of view, the internet was never created as a platform for young people and young children. When you go into schools and you're seeing 7-year-olds with iPhones that are not monitored by parents, it's absurd. The parents seem to buy the devices and take no control over how they're used. The internet can be a problem if used incorrectly, and it has consequences.
But hold on a minute, don't we? But wait a minute,
and they're not working with the parents.
But we ban children. Children aren't allowed to smoke cigarettes. They're not allowed to buy alcohol. Why don't we simply say you're not allowed a mobile phone below a certain age?
Tell me, but you go into a school where I go in all over the country, our team do. You cannot get parents to come to the evening performance. You get a school where there's maybe 800 children. You're lucky if you get 10 parents. Everything these days seems to be the school's responsibility. When I go in and we start training at year 3, which is 7-year-olds, and I would say in an average class of 30 children, when we ask the question, how many of you have had really gross, worrying, concerning images sent to your phone, how many of you? There's 5 in every class of 30.
Okay, so genuinely worrying. Okay, Marilyn, let's talk to Brendan O'Neill then. And look, I suppose the argument from Marilyn then is, look, the kids are seeing this stuff. We see, stuff promoting self-harm, sexual abuse, sexualised images, all very disturbing. She's saying, look, parents aren't policing this. They either don't care, they don't understand, they don't know, in which case we are going to need this policed, in which case social media companies, they're not going to do it of their own volition. We need to have Ofcom policing them. That's the argument. What do you say to that?
I think that's a really problematic argument, and I think this whole plan of allowing Ofcom to police the internet, and particularly user-generated social media websites, I think is a disaster for internet freedom and for freedom of speech. We can't ask the government to circumvent freedom itself and to override adults in the name of protecting children. It really should be a parent's responsibility to use software, to use gadgets, to ensure that if their children are using the internet, that they aren't seeing certain things. The problem with the government's proposal and the government's policy is this blurring of the line between illegal content and harmful content. And you asked the million-dollar question, Julia, earlier on. Who defines what is harmful content? Because it covers, cyberbullying, trolling, offensive content, extremist content. But these are all entirely subjective categories. We know, for example, that feminists who criticise transgenderism, that's now described as trolling. Yeah. Will social media be pressured to take that stuff down? So we're opening the gate to not simply the removal of illegal material, which most of us would support, but the policing of genuine public discussion between adults.
And this is the issue, isn't it, Marilyn? Because, for instance, I mean, again, when Brendan said this, this is the key thing. It's like, what counts as, if it's illegal content, then yes, fair enough. The laws have been decided, such as we do have input by people who are accountable to us. But when it's someone saying, oh, that's offensive, or that's harmful, or that's trolling, lots of things which some people think are all of those things, lots of other people don't think are those things. So who gets to decide? Isn't there a bit of an issue here?
I totally agree with your other guest. I would totally agree with him. Sorry, I didn't catch his name. It's
Brendan O'Neill.
It's subjective. Some children, when you talk to them about what is harmful to you, to what is distressing to you, some children find anything to do with animals, harming animals, more distressful than watching some naked man. It's very subjective.
But isn't that the argument why, therefore, there shouldn't be controls by the media?
At the end of the day, it is about parental intervention. Why does your 7-year-old need an iPhone?
Yeah. Okay, but we've made that, Marilyn. We made that point, and I'm very much of the view that they shouldn't be in school anyway. But 7-year-olds definitely don't need iPhones. But this is the key thing, isn't it, Brendan? Coming back to you, that actually, this is a failure by parents. It's also a failure, I think, a lot of the time by the social media firms, that they haven't been limiting some of the content, which a lot of us would undoubtedly find offensive, in terms of images of child sexual abuse. It is extraordinary how easy that stuff is to find, even on pornographic sites. There's been some exposés recently. Social media firms haven't been doing their due diligence because they haven't faced punishments for it. Do we not need to at least have some sort of proper sort of levels of fines? And we are talking in the millions, possibly even the billions, finding them when they are clearly not doing enough to take down images of child sexual abuse, even when they've been, highlighted to them. Because that's not a matter of opinion. That's really clear-cut illegal material.
Yes, child abuse is illegal material. The creation of it necessarily involves committing a criminal offence, and the most grotesque criminal offence. So there's no argument there. That should be taken down incredibly swiftly. And, there is an argument that if social media companies aren't taking that down, then they could be held responsible for publishing it. I don't have a problem with that argument. What I do have a problem with is that Silicon Valley generally is becoming more and more censorious. It's becoming more and more woke and politically correct. So it's censorious on the side of on one side in the culture war. And I think this kind of pressure from the government and from Ofcom for the Silicon Valley and social media companies to be more proactive on supposedly harmful content will give them yet another green light to take down more and more stuff, in order to be cautious, in order to please Ofcom. And I think it could definitely give rise to more political censorship. The great thing about the internet, it is a Wild West, it is free, it is crazy, but it's the first platform in the history of humanity where ordinary people can publish their ideas. And we have got to hold on to that and not let it be taken away.
But Marilyn Hawes, just briefly back to you. I mean, it has been the Wild West in the social media and on the internet generally. Of course, it's not Wild West when it comes to what newspapers can print. A lot of controls. Lawyers overlook everything that goes in the papers. It's certainly not a Wild West when it comes to broadcasters on radio stations like my own and TV. We have some very strict rules about what we can do, say, particularly during election periods and the like, and factual content. Do you think that there should be a lot more control over the internet generally?
I'm not even sure it's about the control of it. It's the taking down of these gross images that are out there on child abuse, for sure. But can I just say, even if you look at live streaming is a great platform for learning good stuff. There's always someone that's going to use it adversely. Children between the age of 8 and 13, girls especially, getting their iPhones and iPads up in their bedrooms, contacting random strangers and doing sexual acts in front of that webcam. Who's responsible for keeping those phones
I'm with you. It comes back to the parents. I'm sorry, you need to know what your kids are doing. Marilyn Hawes, thank you. Just finally come back to you, Brendan. Look, same point to you. I feel that I can speak freely, and I was a newspaper columnist that I felt that I could speak freely. Within the law, in terms of not libelling people or encouraging, abuse or violence of somebody. Why should the internet uniquely not have those same restrictions, which are, lots of people would argue, are for all of our good?
I think it's because the internet is different to those other published platforms or broadcast platforms. By the way, I think there are sometimes too many rules in relation to broadcasting and newspapers. But the internet's different because it is much more like a public square. It is the virtual global public square in which anyone, whether you are an editor or a journalist or simply an ordinary person, can go into that public square and say what you think and engage with people and take part in public debate. I think it's so important that we do everything we can to preserve the freedom of that public square. And I think using the legitimate concerns about what children might see in order to weaken internet freedom more broadly is a really bad road to go down.